Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On this week's episode, we're breaking down the top 16 from the Mox Masters Invitational. Now, I'm not only going to try and break down this top 16 for you today, I'm also going to try and break down the Mox Masters cEDH Open, which is something that happened simultaneously to this tournament. For those who don't know, the Invitational was all players who had qualified by playing through the online Mox Masters tournaments throughout the years. Now, obviously, not every single player who qualified was able to actually make it out to this tournament. You know, you have people who live in Europe, people who just couldn't get out and travel to this tournament, but all the participants in this tournament were once again qualified players who had either played in the Mox Masters tournaments, the Playing with Power League throughout the year, or people who had top four the last chance qualifier, which happened the day before this grand tournament. So definitely not the most players in attendance, but the player quality was obviously significantly higher because these were all well-placed members of the Mox Masters crowd. I did participate in this tournament myself, but did not make top cut. It was definitely an interesting couple of games. Rather disappointing for my own personal experience at the tournament was there's a lot of just scenarios in which people made suboptimal players and sort of threw the games to third parties, in which, you know, they definitely were not like being greedy and then getting rewarded for it, but instead being greedy and then throwing the game to other players, which happened to me basically every single round during this tournament, which was obviously rather disappointing from a tournament with such a high quality pool of players. But, you know, sometimes these things happen, and cEDH is a very variance heavy format, so not much you can do. However, let's break down this top 16 for you all today. If you enjoy videos like this, please remember to hit like and subscribe. It helps out the channel for free. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, making sure that I can continue to keep doing these and pushing out multiple videos like I'll be doing this week, make sure to head over to patreon.com/comedianmtg. Any support over there helps out the channel a ton. It helps me continue to do this work full time. And we'll talk about cEDH coaching later in this video. Quick shout out, however, Dragonshield, actually an affiliate of this channel for a long time, description down below, has actually revamped their website and a bunch of stuff like that. And now there's a code where if you buy Dragonshield through the link down below, you can use code comedian and get some money off those sleeves, which is pretty sick. So I figured I should shout them out. Anyways, let's jump into this top 16. We have Hellenium here, good friend of the channel, with T&K Breach. It's pretty classic Timnacron Breach deck. I believe this is a list that Hal doesn't even really play a ton, but just sort of picked it up last minute for this tournament. It's pretty classic blue farm stuff. No Talion here in the creature slot. They are using the One Ring part of the blue farm sphere. This is a 26 lander, which I was talking to Hal before the tournament, and I was telling him to put in Teferi and cut and go up to 27 lands, but my suggestions were not heard for that one. But yeah, 26 lands, made it to the top 16 with this blue farm list. Definitely sweet. I like that there's at least 16 artifacts in this list. I know some blue farm lists can be down to like 14 artifacts, which always makes me nervous in playing this archetype. Apart from that, not too many crazy inclusions here with this deck. Pretty classic blue farm list. Congrats to Hal on making top 16 of this big tournament. Okay, this is the list I was definitely most excited about, I'm not gonna lie, talking about this tournament. In 15th place here, we have BTS Born to Storm Maelstrom Wind cEDH by Varix. Now, Varix is a longtime watcher of this channel, and I believe the Mind Sculptors as well, and this deck is I'm just so happy to see Yidris being played. They reached out to me before the tournament and were telling me they were playing Yidris, and we were super excited. They're talking to Cal and I, because Cal, Mind Sculptors, my co-host on that podcast, we talk about Yidris a lot and how much we love this deck and wish someone would have a list for it. And, you know, top 16 of a big tournament with this deck. Going for Thoric Alliance, pretty classic stuff there, but doing the Yidris thing for sure. This deck is definitely, it seems like a Sans White mid-range Breach for sure, and then, you know, down to 25 lands. Sick way to rip through your deck. Being able to play the best Yidris card, Song of Creation. If you resolve this and you get to hit in with Yidris, the game's over. You've got it. It's so powerful. This one playing Necropotence line. It's on the One Ring. No Talion in the creatures. We have cards like Beseech the Mirror, a bunch of wheels, all these things to like keep your storm plan going. And then one of the main parts of Yidris that is main benefits is that you get a bunch of these 0-drop spells that you can cascade into with Yidris's ability. So you get Inevitable Betrayal, which literally just allows you to go into someone's deck, boom, take a creature, play it for free. It's literally a bribery that costs you 0 mana. You have a Profane Tutor, just a Demonic Tutor, once again for 0 mana. Wheel of Fate, wheel for 0 mana. So a lot of different ways to pay off from Yidris flips. You know, you've got a lot of different ways to generate mana here. Obviously, with all these wheels, Bowmasters is an all-star in a deck like this. You have Bergi, great for a lot of Storm payoffs. Definitely interested to hear how this list fared against, you know, a lot of people who are just like planting Rhystic Studies and passing in this format. Now, I think Born Upon the Wind definitely is a card that probably puts in a lot of work in a deck like this. Final Fortune and Born Upon the Wind also really good with Necropotence in this deck. So there's definitely some pretty cool stuff you can do with it. Defense grid here to be able to secure those storm turns, make sure no one's interacting with your wins. This deck is awesome. I love Yidris. I'm so excited to see that a Yidris deck got played in this tournament and made top 16. I definitely want to sleeve up Yidris for a tournament very soon because it's literally one of my favorite commanders ever printed. You know, it gets hated on a little bit in the format, especially because it's very easy to target down, right? Anytime you play Yidris, people are like, okay, cool, kill it before it gets to actually attack in, right? So that's why the deck definitely has a lot of these sort of plans here that are very clearly like leaning back into the more ad nauseum style focus stuff, you know, moving away from the Yidris plan being your sole way of actually being able to gain advantage. But seriously, congrats to Eric's for this list. It's sick. When in doubt, Jun Blue Soggy Edition. So this is Jun plus Blue by I Blame Max. This is a Thrasios Vile Smasher mid-range deck. It's very similar to what Jorman won Bonfire with. It's sort of this hybrid between like an ad nauseum mid-range list. It's got like Dockside combos with Dockside and Sabretooth. It uses Kenon and I believe Basalt Monolith, yeah, to make infinite mana with Thrasios. It also can do the Underworld Breach stuff. It plays Thoracle lines. So like sort of this like mid-range combo version of this Thrasios Vile archetype, right? Thrasios is definitely not your like main game plan by any means. It's more just like, here is one of the best ways to be playing Sans White. You know, instead of going for like the Crom Ikra or Crom Rayhand option, you're using green to be able to power out these cards and use Thrasios to be able to be an infinite mana payoff, unlike other certain combinations in these colors that are doing different things. So, and congratulations to Max for making top 16 with this deck. Courage, the Cowardly Dog by Adatari. This deck we literally did a coaching session on the week before this tournament, so pretty sick to see our patron of the channel here played in this deck for the tournament. I know they were a little nervous about playing this list specifically, looking to move on from it going forward, but still able to make top 16 here with this deck. It's a pretty classic Atraxa deck, definitely leaning, you know, a little heavier on the artifacts, so you can play cards like One Ring. No Talion in the list, but using Grand Arbiter as sort of that 4-drop that gets you between casts of Atraxa, and also can kind of protect Atraxa from a lot of free counter spells in the way that some people are using Boromir nowadays. Definitely helps to have Atraxa not cost 7 mana for sure. Apart from that, it's doing a lot of the classic mid-range stuff. You know, you have your food chain lines to make infinite mana that way. Blind Obedience pretty necessary in the current meta, especially if you're in a deck that's like, you know, throwing a decent amount of permanents onto the battlefield for sure. Has Thoracle Consult lines. No ad nauseum in this list just because it's a little bit more grindy, a little bit more mid-range, and then ending with a giant 7-drop to be able to gain you a bunch of advantage. Also using Teferi plus Displacer Kitten as another way to be able to win the game, not include the fact that Kitten is just so good with the Atraxa in general. L'Appel du Vide, I hope is how you say that, by Wiley. This is Kenon. It's a pretty classic Kenon list. I believe the player in top 16 went up to Wounded Satellite and said, hey, I'm using your exact list. If this is the story I remember correctly, I believe this is exactly Wounded Satellite's list from his most recent version. So I think the last March of the Ents, I don't know if that's in Wounded's rendition of this list, but this one is actually, I believe I was sitting next to this player during the Swiss and I saw that in their hand, and it took all my willpower not to be like, what, to seeing this card. This card's sick though. It's you draw cards equal to greatest toughness among creatures you control and put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So last March of the Ents, being uncounterable is obviously very, very powerful, and in a deck like Kenon, you know, you're gonna be in situations where even if you just have like a Seedborn Muse, draw 4 and then put any number of creatures onto the battlefield from your hand is pretty intense. And not to mention if you have cards like Void Winnow or you know, Nezahal or something like that, you know, with very, very high toughnesses, being able to just drop everything you could possibly imagine onto the battlefield. We also have Aboleth Spawn. A lot of Kenon players have been picking this up lately. I've seen it basically come from Jorman's variant of the list. Is the first person I saw playing the Spawn in the deck. I don't know if I love Spawn, if I'm being honest, but it definitely is a card that will allow you to gain a bunch of advantage. Definitely nice to like grab a Dockside activation before your opponent's Dockside and then like float all the treasures for Kenon's activation. Interesting stuff for sure. But apart from that, it's, at the end of the day, a Kenon list, you know, the biggest one here, 25 lands, probably the least amount I've seen in a Kenon list, which is pretty crazy, especially when you consider the fact that they are on Emergent Zone and Treasure Vault and Homeward Path and Ancient Tomb. It's a lot of colorless, it's a Treasure Vault. A lot of colorless sources for a 25 land deck. So Kenon's decks are starting to look a lot more like Rogsai as time goes on. We have Cat Food by NATO. NATO also winner of SCG Columbus and performing pretty consistently in a number of these online tournaments with this Atraxa deck. Yeah, just someone who shows up, plays this deck, and does really well with it. NATO's version opting to go for the Talion, like we were talking about with Adatari's list, but also playing the One Ring. Definitely an artifact or card draw heavy version of this archetype for sure. Playing a lot of pretty standard stuff for this game plan. I notice a lot of Atraxa players will play like 1 or 2 green tutors and then not be on Grafdigger's Cage, which I always find very fascinating. I wonder like what the number of, you know, green tutor effects you have to be like, well, is it worth just cutting all these green ones and then just playing Grafdigger's Cage in your deck because of how powerful that effect is? Also, no blind obedience in this version of the deck, but on 15 artifacts and a couple enchantments, so, you know, maybe not the most necessary for sure. But congrats to NATO in the top 16. Manella Midget here, doing the same thing they've been doing to Mox Masters, showing up, playing Thrasios Dargo, and making good results with it, right? We got dual caster combos in the deck, we got Teamer Dockside lines, we have the ability to Neoform and Tidespot Tyrant, we got our Displacer Kit and stuff with Imperial Recruiter, they'll get you Eternal Witness, Bolt, all of that stuff. You have your Spellseeker lines with that. We have our Kenon here for our Basalt Monolith. Consecrated Sphinx is a card I'm actually seeing a lot more of in the 99s. People are actually starting to switch, and I've actually done this myself with my Dawnmaker variant. Take out Seaboard Muse and throw in Consecrated Sphinx, and it's just being like, it's a different style of play pattern, and it's basically because Seaboard Muse itself is being hated on pretty significantly in the format, even if it is drawing less cards than something like a Consecrated Sphinx or even a Crom. I've seen situations in which someone will actively go out of their way to remove a Seaboard Muse when it's getting literally the same amount of or less cards than a Crom and a Tymna in a table rotation. So very interesting to see that card being like hated on so aggressively. But you know, as I said, adaptations happen. Moving away into something like Consecrated Sphinx is a good way to sort of deal with that. But yeah, this deck is very proactive. I'm surprised that these lists aren't running Altar of Dementia, because that plus Underworld Breach is just a win, and playing cards like Goblin Varn, it's a little odd for me. Greater Good, great synergy with our Dargo here, and then Underworld Breach, the main way that these lists tend to actually win the game. A lot of advantage, a lot of Thrasio stuff, but with that Dargo power in the command zone to really just start exploding out of nowhere. So congratulations. This is the other list that I was very, very excited to talk about before this tournament breakdown. This is LJ. So for those who don't know, LJ has been playing Edric since the dawn of time. Like LJ is always playing Edric, and was playing Edric during Flash Winter, was playing Edric during the period in between now, is always playing Edric, but this is perhaps, even with Flash Edric, the strangest version of Edric I've ever seen. And this list is crazy. Basically, LJ was like, yeah, when Bowmasters was printed, I realized that playing, you know, a bunch of flying men was not gonna actually get you there. A bunch of X1s that die to Bowmasters is not actually going to be able to stop things in a Bowmaster meta. So he brewed this insane pile of cards, and yeah, I don't even know how to describe what I'm looking at here, but it's crazy. I saw this during the tournament. There's so much stuff going on here, and I'm gonna do my best to break it all down, but my god, the layers upon layers upon layers of craziness that is this deck cannot just be summarized so succinctly. So there's the classic Edric stuff where you got the time warp effects, right? Taking extra turns, plus you have Regrowth, you have Noxious Revival over here in the instance, you have Reclaim, which is basically a 1 mana version of Noxious Revival. I believe there's Eternal Witness as well, no Endurance, and Shigeki. So like a bunch of different ways to regrow cards, right? So when you start doing the thing where you hit with Edric, draw a couple cards, and then you can start like looping turns, which is like the traditional Edric way of winning the game. No Nexus of Fate anymore. But now let's talk about the fact that, so there's a bunch of interaction here, right? We go up even to crazy cards like Commandeer and Misdirection, right? Born Upon the Wind for instant speed wins, right? But you're like, how do you do a time win at instant speed? Well, no. This deck is like, I mean, at the end of the day, LJ kept joking around saying, Edric's here for the colors. And I think it's literally here for the colors and card draw, because this deck is buck wild. It's sort of like Kenon at home at the end of the day, but there's like lines with Cloud of Fairies and Displacer Kitten where you can like start looping that and just start flickering those over and over again. There is the fact that there is Kenon in this deck in the 99 and Basalt Monolith. So the Kenon Basalt is in the 99 of this deck that does not have an infinite mana outlet in the command zone, but it's also on Seedborn Muse for the synergies with Kenon and with Thrasios, which are also in here. Thrasios also being your main infinite mana payoff for the stuff we were talking about with the Kenon Basalt combos. And then there's also Hullbreaker Horror in this deck that, once again, Edric does not is not an infinite mana payoff, but you can start looping that over and over again. I guess Uro also can be a outlet in some capacities, but this is also just like card draw, life gain, and a way to sort of take over grindy games on some crazy interaction like Subtlety. Love the Sky Turtle. Everyone plays Sky Turtles, but even playing like Malcolm's in this deck, and Dosan as a Grand Abolisher in green. Yeah, this list is just insane. Like there's a couple evasive attackers, right? You got your Mastermind, Ledger Shredder, Mercurial Spell Dancer as like evasive attackers that just don't die to Bowmasters, right? And then you have things like Soratami Cloud Skater, which helps you loop Mystic Sanctuary with all of those turn spells that we talked before. The more I look at it, the crazier it gets, right? Like this list is absolutely buck wild. I adore it, truly. It's like a beautiful masterpiece of insanity, and I love it. And I said this to LJ's face when we were at this tournament. I was like, this list is absolutely insane. And basically the way LJ was saying that they were doing well with the deck is like they were just hanging out. Like they just weren't doing much of anything until the game sort of, that used a bunch of interaction and then came to a point where he was like, okay, yeah, now I can either start like doing the turns thing, or I can start winning with Kenon and flipping into stuff and getting Basalt Monolith once again through Kenon. And gets to a point where, even if Edric is kind of shut off, it's sort of the way to go about it. But yeah, this list is like just a list that I would see on paper and be like, there's no way that this actually works. But it made Edric and LJ get to the top 16. So yeah, congrats on LJ making this absolutely insane pile. LJ is just like a player who loves their deck, right? Loves Edric, and has said, I'll change it as many ways as I need to make Edric playable in cEDH. And you know what? They took this deck that's full of surprises and they made it for sure. So good job, LJ. Good Soup by Freedom Waffle. For those who saw my breakdown of the Crimson Lion top 16, this is a very similar list. This is Freedom Waffle playing Blue Farm. Basically the same deck they were playing in that tournament. It's pretty classic Blue Farm stuff, not playing the One Ring and not playing Tally, and so down a few card advantage engines in the archetype. There was a bit of conversation about Freedom Waffle basically not getting into the top 4 when they should have because of a judge ruling that 3 out of the 4 players present at the table very, very much disagreed with. So that part's a little unfortunate to really hear that the tournament ended in that way for Freedom and for the other players in that top 16 pod. Basically, a short summary of it is that party was sort of implied passed, and then 3 players understood it to be so, and then 1 player said, no, I didn't pass priority. And despite judges ruling the opposite way earlier in the tournament with a nearly identical interaction, they had to reverse the game state to a point in which a Kenon flip sort of just completely changed the entire game. So, as I said, a little unfortunate to hear that a top 16 match for a very, very important tournament kind of ended with a judge call that 3 of the players were really dissatisfied by. It's a shame that can happen, but it's also a part of competing is that those things do come up. So Snake Blue Farm by Snake Akuza. We have Blue Farm by Snake. Snake's been doing pretty well with the Blue Farm list. I play them in the Swiss. They play the list very well. We're very patient, drawing a bunch of cards, and playing the list in a very efficient way. Yeah, it's Blue Farm. It's a very good Blue Farm deck, and Snake has been doing very well with this list pretty consistently. It's either like this list or Rogside that they're playing, and they've been doing this thing with this deck pretty consistently, so congrats. Fool's Gold by Sharky. Sharky back here rocking this Crom Tavesh list. 1 player doing the thing where they are rocking this deck over and over again. For those who haven't seen it before, this is pretty much a Turbo Nas list with the outlet of having Hullbreaker Horror lines also in the deck. Basically, you swap your Tymna for your Tavesh. You get focused into the Grixis suite, but you sort of have Tavesh as like an alt win con in some sense when you ultimate it. It's definitely different than Tymna. It doesn't require as much direct combat stuff. But Sharky has has been basically the only one doing really well with this deck, but is consistently showing up, doing well in these tournaments. You know, recently at Festival Nights, I was like, oh, it was their first in-person one where they did really well, but now here they are doing really well in multiple in-person tournaments, including the Mox Masters Invitational. So well done. Grixis Enchantments by Zane. Zane absolutely dominated the Swiss of this tournament by going nearly undefeated with this Rograi list. I think they only lost once during the regular Swiss. Zane has been crushing it with Rogsai. Basically the only consistent player of Rogsai doing really well. Very few exceptions in the current metagame right now. But yeah, Zane's been doing very well with Rogsai. It's the pretty classic. We look down here, we know it's the same thing. 24 lands here. We got Necro Lines. Born Upon the Wind was a really interesting addition for this deck. It really made the Necropotence lines in Rogsai really consistent. But yeah, Zane's definitely a player who asks his opponents to like let him have it, and then, or make him have it, I should say. And then if they don't, Zane will be able to take over. And then in situations in which the deck's being hated out, I know I've seen him do it many times, where he just sits there in a Mystic Remora and sort of waits for the coast to be clear. And when you have such a fast, explosive deck and a very competent pilot playing the deck, things like that lead to pretty good results. Before we break into our top 4, there's a couple things to mention. One, we do cEDH coaching here on this channel. If you are interested in cEDH coaching, please feel free to reach out to me. You can, we just actually added 5 more slots over on the Patreon for Patreon monthly coaching sessions. But as a reminder, you can always reach out to me outside of Patreon. Just shoot me a DM, either hit me up through comedianmtg@gmail.com, find me on Twitter or Discord, any of those places, all of which are linked down below. And you can receive cEDH coaching. We have gameplay coaching, which you and several others can sit and play games, and we can go through coaching moments in those games. And then there's also one-on-one sessions, going over decks, going over politics, going over different play patterns in cEDH. So all of those things are ready and available. And also a reminder, as we get closer to the holiday season, you can always get a friend or loved one cEDH coaching as a gift. Anyways, moving forward, one more thing to note before we break into this top 4, the fact that this top 4 was a little bit different. They tried an experimental version of top 4 in which they played a best of 2 match. From what I heard, most of the players were very against this format. As someone who played an entire league playing best of 2 cEDH, it's pretty awful, I'm not gonna lie. There are situations in which one player can 2-0, right, win 2 games in a row, and then it can be done in an hour and a half. And then there are situations in which there are 5 untimed games because one player can win, and then you have to go to a 5th game as that tiebreaker, where one player can each get 1 win, and then those can last 6 to 8 hours. So the variance of like 90 minutes to like 8 hours for a best of 2 scenario, or I guess best 2 out of 5, right? So it's not exactly the finals format that a lot of people are excited about, and the Invitational was a big tournament. It was a year's worth of stuff, so I get kind of leading up to that, but many of the players were very much unhappy with this decision. From what I heard, they talked about doing that for the semifinals as well, but a number of players and staff also sort of said, no, we don't want to be doing that. But yeah, as a TO, I very much would like lean away from going for that option. One thing to also mention about the Swiss of this tournament, it was another one of those situations in which folks could 2-0 and draw into it because there was a 5-round bracket. So definitely some organizational parts of this tournament that I wish were a little bit cleaned up, but definitely still a very well run tournament as far as that's concerned. But yeah, the format of the finals match was definitely a topic of a lot of discussion and much not positive discussion from a lot of the players. We had people who were eliminated in the top 16 who were like, yeah, I'm actually sad that I don't have, more prizing, but also happy that I don't have to be there for a potentially 5-game match. So all that being said, let's break into our top 4 and talk about our players for this. We have the Weatherlight cEDH by Tapspace. This is a pretty classic 5-color Sisay list, doing all of the classic 5-color Sisay stuff. Rocco in this version of the deck on top of Dihada is awesome. I've been talking about how much I love Rocco in this version of the list and how it's going into my list. This definitely is a heavier mana value version of this deck that I think I'm used to seeing. It's not running as many things as Malcolm's list is currently, but definitely having a higher end of legendary permanents. So we have Urtai, we have Sakashima, Talion, Rocco, so definitely leaning a little higher on the mana curve for sure. This list is doing a lot of crazy stuff, but at the end of the day, trying to do the Sisay stuff where you get 2-colored legendary permanents. You get a Dockside, Bloom Tender, Favor Elder, etc. And then you just start comboing off and pulling legends out of your deck to be able to assemble a win, usually with an outlet like Mount Doom as a quick way to win the game, or just infinite Planeswalker activations with your lines with Nicol Bolas, Amanatu, and Oath of Teferi. If you're interested, we did do a deck tech on my variant of this archetype that I took to a top 4 and multiple top 16s in the past. It's definitely a deck I have really enjoyed and I've had a lot of success with. It was my other deck that I was thinking about playing for this tournament, and definitely, maybe a little regret that I didn't play it for this tournament. But that being said, congrats to Tapspace on their top 4. It's a very solid list and gonna do you pretty well. We have Grixis Death Flips by Big Richie 2004. This is Krark Silas. Actually did borrow this deck list to play after hours between the regular Swiss day and the semifinals/finals day, and I think I lost 6 flips in a row and just literally flipped out of the game when I played it. But Big Richie taking this crazy deck and making it all the way to the top 4 of this tournament. Our winning player, from my understanding about the finals match, won 2 games of the 3 that were played for the finals match, and this Grixis Flip list was the other one that won 1. But yeah, so this is a list that doesn't exactly do the Krark Sakashima thing, because they have Harmonic Prodigy and Veyran, and those are kind of the effects that can mimic that. And the rest of the deck is sort of just Grixis good stuff, right? We have your Ad Nauseams, we have, your Thoracle, Underworld Breach lines, you have all the classic Grixis stuff that is just Grixis good stuff, right? Low land count, early acceleration, Krark's turn on your Mox Ambers and stuff like that. You have grinding station lines, but then you also have the Krark stuff. So you got your Krark's Thumbs, and you got your free spells that you can cast over and over again with Krark, and you got your storm payoffs like Frantic Surge. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. At the end of the day, this is a Grixis Krark list that made it all the way to the top 4 of this major tournament. So nice job, Richie. We have Kai, the Fervent Alchemist, back at it again with this Narset Breach deck. Kai has never been more consistent than playing this list. This list has been doing really well in Kai's hands. Yeah, I mean, Kai is just killing it with this deck. I played against them in the Swiss, and they definitely presented a pretty decent threat in a game that they were seemingly out of. They almost won multiple times. So it's pretty sick stuff. There's a lot of crazy stuff you can do with Jace Perfected Mind being basically another copy of Brain Freeze. But for those who haven't seen this list, it is basically a deck that says, I'm going to play my Underworld Breach, and if my Underworld Breach doesn't resolve, I'm going to try and mill my opponents and play their Underworld Breach and kind of go from there. Now, originally this list was called Traumatized because there used to be a Traumatized in it, which says you mill half of your deck. Unfortunately, that is no longer in the list, but this has just become absolutely Jeskai explosive good stuff, right? We have our silence effects and Range Captain, Grand Abolisher, your storm payoffs like Dragon's Channeler, Burgi, all of that stuff, Dockside loops. You have Teferi Time Rattler as just another Grand Abolisher. No Kitten in this list because that's not what this deck's trying to do. This is just trying to literally breach as quickly, as explosively as possible, playing a bunch of crazy instants and sorceries that help you dig through your deck. But this is definitely, at the end of the day, it's a breach deck. You lose your breach, you try and hope someone else has a breach, and then if not, you have to start getting really creative. But didn't seem to be a problem for Kai as he made it all the way to the top 4 of this tournament. Well done. I've heard in the semifinals he was able to actually execute a win at instant speed, from my understanding, which is pretty cool. Also kind of interesting because I don't see a Born Upon the Wind in this deck, so I'm not sure if he was able to steal it from another player with an effect, but from what I heard, he had won with Born Upon the Wind. So that's kind of strange that I'm not seeing it in this deck. Kai, if you see this, let me know some clarification on how that happened. In general, Grixis Breach, Narset, great job, Kai. You're killing it with this deck for sure. We have We Play in Yu-Gi-Oh! By Freedom Waffle and Samurai Dancer. Samurai Dancer, our champion of this tournament, crushing it with this Malcolm Kedis deck. This deck that sort of felt like it came out of nowhere. I know I sort of got the background of Samurai Dancer playing this deck, which is basically I had taken my Malcolm Kedis to a tournament. Freedom Waffle had said, hey, you should come check out this deck. And then Samurai Dancer picking it up and just crushing tournament after tournament with it. Really taking this deck that a lot of people consider a pretty fringe list and just doing consistently well with it, which is pretty sick. Yeah, this deck is absolutely awesome. So Kedis plus Malcolm, every turn gives you 3 treasures. You are playing Glinthorn Buccaneer stuffed with your Malcolm. You're also playing a bunch of different hack combos that allow you to change the type of cards like Reckless Fireweaver and Hedron Detonator and Ingenious Artillerist to make them into pirates so that they can then combo with our good friend Malcolm. There's a bunch of different type of hack changing effects. So we have your trickery charms, you have your artificial evolutions, you have your nothing here in the enchantments, you do have your Maskwood Nexus. So a bunch of different effects that allow you to turn your creatures into pirates and then ping your opponents to death, but also playing cards like Ophidian Eye and Curiosity and Tandem Lookout as they combo with both Niv Mizzet and Glinthorn Buccaneer. So pretty sick stuff. Then you have a bunch of mana, so we're able to pump that into cards like Consecrated Sphinx, stuff like that, a bunch of wheels. But yeah, Samurai Dancer crushing this major tournament with this Is It Malcolm deck, a deck that, you know, months ago people wouldn't even have thought of as a tournament winning deck, but now multiple wins with this archetype for Samurai Dancer. Congratulations to our pilot here. Not an easy feat and well done. A lot of people, you know, kind of consider Malcolm to be a pretty dead deck, but this Is It version putting up numbers, putting up results, and doing really well. So congrats to Samurai. This is awesome and well deserved. And that's it for our Mox Masters Invitational of 2023. What do y'all think about these decks? Obviously, I'm a little geeking about LJ's Edric list and the Yidris by Varix. So many crazy things from this tournament. Definitely a lot of wild stuff. I think the format's definitely still pretty diverse. There's still a lot of crazy decks that are up here, you know, making top results. I don't think, if you'd asked anybody, Krark, Silas, Narset, and Kedis, Malcolm would be the decks you think win the Invitational this time around. But yeah, these are the decks at the top. And even Sisei, which is a deck, you know, 6 months ago, people weren't even taking that seriously. It's definitely not the list you expect to see up here at the top tables, but here they are, doing well, performing well, and taking down tournaments. So that's a wrap on Mox Masters Invitational of 2023. And hopefully next time we'll see where it happens. And from what I've heard, people were earning qualifying points for next year's tournament, so I guess the next year's tournament's happening. Thank you all for watching this video. Y'all are the best, and can't thank you enough for being here and supporting this channel. As I mentioned, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Any help on Patreon helps continue to make this channel something I can keep pouring my entire heart and soul into. So thank you all, and I can't wait to see you next time. Peace.